The first whisper of winter had brushed Boston, leaving behind a crispness in the air that bit at exposed skin and painted the last stubborn leaves in hues of amber and rust. Inside their Beacon Hill brownstone, however, Eleanor Vance felt a different kind of chill, one that had little to do with the late November evening. David was late. Unusually late. His company's annual holiday party. She'd been meant to go, had even bought a new deep sapphire dress, but a critical project at her marketing firm had imploded, demanding her full attention. "Go without me," she'd urged, kissing him distractedly, her mind already parsing through crisis management strategies. "Have fun. Represent." Now the grandfather clock in the hall chimed too, its resonant tones echoing in the otherwise silent house. Ellie lay in their king-sized bed, the space beside her cool and undisturbed. She drifted in and out of sleep, a knot of unease tightening in her stomach with each passing hour. It wasn't like David to be this inconsiderate, not without a text. The scrape of a key in the front door lock finally broke the silence. It was followed by a clumsy thud, then muffled cursing. Ellie sat bolt upright, her heart thumping. She pulled on her silk robe, its familiar comfort doing little to soothe the sudden, sharp anxiety. David stumbled into the dim light of the hallway, silhouetted against the street lamps filtering through the fanlight window. He was disheveled. His usually impeccably knotted tie was askew, his shirt partly untucked. But it was the smell that hit her first. A cloying, sweet perfume that wasn't hers, mingled with stale alcohol. David? What on earth? Her voice was sharper than she intended. He flinched, squinting. "Ellie? Hey, didn't mean to wake you." His words were slurred, his movements uncoordinated as he fumbled with his coat. "It's after 2. I was worried." She stepped closer, her eyes narrowing. The perfume was stronger now, alien and invasive in their shared space. "You reek of alcohol. And what is that smell?" He avoided her gaze, busying himself with his coat, which he dropped. "Just party ran late. You know how these things are." A prickle of dread, cold and sharp, ran down Ellie's spine. This wasn't just a late night. This was something else. She saw his phone, screen lit, on the hall table where he'd evidently tossed it. A new message notification glowed. Before she could consciously decide to, her hand darted out, picking it up. "Ellie, don't..." David's voice, suddenly sober and panicked, cut through the air. But she'd already seen the preview. Last night was amazing. Still thinking about it. Amanda. Amanda Stevens, a junior analyst from his department. Ellie had met her briefly at a summer work picnic. Young, bright, overly eager. The winky face emoji felt like a physical blow. The phone clattered from her numb fingers onto the polished wood floor. The sound was deafening in the sudden, thick silence. Ellie stared at David, her mind struggling to process the implication. The dishevelment, the perfume, the late hour, the text message, pieces of a horrifying puzzle clicking into place. "David," she whispered, her voice trembling. "What did you do?" He looked cornered, his face pale, all traces of intoxication seemingly evaporated, replaced by a stark, raw fear. He opened his mouth, then closed it. The silence stretched, taut and unbearable. "Tell me," she insisted, a cold wave of nausea rising. "Tell me, now." His shoulders slumped. He finally met her eyes, and what she saw there, a toxic cocktail of guilt and shame, confirmed her worst fears before he even spoke. "Ellie, I messed up, royally." "Messed up?" Her voice rose, incredulous. "What does that mean, David? With Amanda?" He nodded, his gaze dropping to the floor. "After the party, a few of us went on to one of the hotel rooms they'd booked for the execs from out of town. We were drinking." His voice trailed off, heavy with an unspoken confession. "You and Amanda?" She pressed, each word a shard of glass in her throat. "Were you with her?" He swallowed hard. The silence was his answer, a devastating, unequivocal yes. Ellie felt the floor tilt beneath her. The carefully constructed edifice of her life, her marriage, their shared future, seemed to crack and groan, threatening to collapse. The sapphire dress, hanging pristine in her closet, flashed in her mind, a symbol of a future that had just been irrevocably tainted. She backed away from him, a hand flying to her mouth as if to stifle a scream or the bile rising in her throat. "Ellie, I am so sorry. It happened. It was a mistake, a terrible mistake." His words were a torrent now, desperate, pleading. But all Ellie could hear was the echo of "amazing" from Amanda's text. All she could smell was that cheap, sweet perfume clinging to him, a violating presence in their home, the home they had poured their souls into renovating, brick by painstaking brick. She turned and fled to the guest room at the far end of the house, the one overlooking the small, shadowed garden. She slammed the door, the sound a definitive punctuation mark to the end of something she hadn't even realized was so fragile. Sinking onto the bed, she wrapped her arms around herself, rocking back and forth. The chill she'd felt earlier had become a bone-deep freeze. The city lights of Boston, usually a comforting panorama from this window, seemed distant and mocking. Her carefully ordered world had just been blown apart by a winky face emoji and the scent of another woman's perfume. The days that followed were a blur of icy silences and scalding accusations. Their brownstone, once a sanctuary of shared dreams and quiet contentment, transformed into a battleground, then a mausoleum. Ellie moved into the guest room permanently, the few feet separating it from their master bedroom feeling like an unbridgeable chasm. Sleep was a luxury she could rarely afford. When it did come, it was haunted by fractured images and a persistent, gnawing anxiety. David was a ghost in his own home, his usual confident stride replaced by a hesitant shuffle. He alternated between desperate apologies, which Ellie met with stony silence or vitriol, and a kind of hollow despair. He left for work before she was up, returned late, the scent of stale office air and takeout food his only companions. The vibrant, ambitious man she had married seemed to have shrunk, consumed by his shame. Ellie functioned on autopilot. She went to work, her professional mask firmly in place, delivering presentations and managing her team with a chilling efficiency that masked the turmoil within. Her colleagues noted her pallor, the new shadows under her eyes, but attributed it to the demanding project she'd just navigated. No one guessed the extent of the inferno raging beneath her composed surface. The city itself felt different. The familiar streets of Boston, the historic architecture she'd always admired, now seemed to mock her with their steadfastness. The public garden, where she and David had shared countless Sunday strolls, felt like a repository of painful memories. The Charles River, usually a source of calm, reflected the gray, oppressive sky, mirroring her internal landscape. Her lifeline was Chloe, her college friend in New York. Their nightly calls were a raw, unfiltered space where Ellie could let the facade crumble. "I don't know what to do, Chloe," she choked out one evening, huddled in the guest room, the phone pressed hard against her ear. "I look at him and I feel disgust, rage. But underneath it all, there's this chasm, like my whole life was a lie." "It's not a lie, Ellie," Chloe said, her voice a steady anchor. "It's a betrayal, a massive, shitty betrayal. You have every right to feel everything you're feeling. Don't let anyone, especially him, tell you otherwise. He keeps saying it was a mistake. One night, too much alcohol. And? Does that make it okay?" Chloe's lawyerly sharpness cut through the fog of Ellie's pain. "It explains, maybe. It doesn't excuse." Ellie's mother, when she finally called, offered a different perspective, one tinged with the pragmatism of her generation. "Oh, Eleanor, darling, it's dreadful. But men can be weak, you know. Is it worth throwing away 15 years? Think carefully, dear. Sometimes you have to find a way to forgive for the sake of, well, for the sake of everything you've built." Ellie had ended the call feeling more confused and isolated than ever. Forgiveness felt like an alien concept, a distant star in a galaxy she couldn't reach. The breaking point came a week after D-Day, Discovery Day, as Ellie had bitterly dubbed it. David found her in the kitchen, staring blankly at a stack of mail. He tried, again, to speak, to apologize. "Ellie, please, we need to talk. I can't live like this." She turned, her eyes blazing with a cold fire. "Live like this? You can't live like this. What about me, David? What about what you've done to me, to us? I know I destroyed everything, but is there nothing? Nothing at all we can do?" His voice was hoarse, his eyes bloodshot. An idea, cold and clinical, had been forming in Ellie's mind. It wasn't born of hope, but of a desperate need for understanding, for some kind of framework to process the chaos. "There's one thing," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "We go to counseling. Couples counseling." David looked startled, then a flicker of something unreadable. Hope? Fear? Crossed his face. "Counseling? You mean to try and fix this?" "I don't know what I mean," Ellie snapped. "I mean I need to understand how this happened. I need to know if there's anything left to even consider salvaging, or if this is just the end, drawn out. You will go. You will sit there, and you will answer every single question. And if you refuse, or if you're not completely honest, then I'll know, and I'll call a lawyer." It was an ultimatum, stark and unforgiving. David stared at her, the fight seeming to drain out of him. "Okay," he whispered. "Okay, Ellie. Anything. I'll do it." He found Dr. Lena Hansen through a referral from his company's EAP, a discreet, highly recommended therapist with an office in a quiet building in Back Bay. The first appointment was scheduled for the following week. The intervening days were filled with a suffocating tension. Ellie felt a strange mixture of dread and a grim, almost detached curiosity. She wasn't going to save her marriage. She was going to dissect its corpse. Dr. Hansen's office was a study in calm neutrality. Soft, earthy tones, comfortable but not plush armchairs. A large, abstract painting on one wall that was either soothing or unsettling. Ellie couldn't decide. Bookshelves lined another wall, filled with texts on psychology and relationships. The air smelled faintly of chamomile and old paper. Dr. Hansen herself was a woman in her mid-50s, with intelligent, empathetic eyes and a presence that was both grounding and gently probing. She listened patiently as Ellie, in a clipped, controlled voice, recounted the events leading them there. David sat beside her, hunched and miserable, occasionally interjecting with a mumbled, "That's true," or, "I know, I was wrong." The early sessions were brutal. Ellie unleashed a torrent of pain, anger, and accusations that had been dammed up for weeks. "How could you?" she demanded, her voice shaking with suppressed fury. 15 years, David. Did any of it mean anything to you? Was it all a lie? David, stripped of his usual defenses, could only offer repeated, inadequate apologies. "I don't know why, Ellie. I was stupid. I was lost. It meant nothing. She meant nothing. She meant nothing." Ellie scoffed, her eyes flashing. "Then I must mean even less, for you to risk everything for nothing." Dr. Hansen navigated these initial explosions with a steady hand, creating a space where Ellie could vent without judgment, and gently prompting David to move beyond self-flagellation towards genuine introspection. "David," she'd say, her tone calm but firm, "Ellie needs to understand what was happening for you, not just that you regret it. What led you to that point?" Slowly, painfully, pieces of a narrative began to emerge from David's shame-choked responses. He spoke of mounting pressure at work, of feeling increasingly invisible, of a gnawing sense of inadequacy he'd never voiced. He confessed to feeling that he and Ellie had been drifting apart for years, living parallel lives under the same roof, their communication reduced to logistics and pleasantries. "It's not an excuse," he'd say, his gaze fixed on his tightly clasped hands. "There is no excuse. But I was lonely, even when you were right there." Ellie listened, a knot of ice in her chest. Lonely? How could he be lonely when she was there, managing their home, supporting his career, being the reliable, capable partner she thought he wanted? His words felt like another betrayal, a rewriting of their shared history. "So this is my fault now?" she shot back one session, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Because I wasn't fulfilling your every emotional whim while also holding down a demanding job and running our lives?" "No, Ellie," Dr. Hansen interjected gently. "It's not about blame. It's about understanding the ecosystem of your marriage. What needs weren't being met for both of you? What wasn't being said?" Ellie resisted this. Her pain was a shield, her anger a fortress. To look at her own potential contributions to the ecosystem felt like absolving David, like admitting she was somehow culpable for his infidelity. And she wasn't. He had made that choice. The brownstone remained a Cold War zone. They moved like strangers through its beautifully appointed rooms, the silence punctuated only by the necessities of cohabitation. Ellie found herself staring at their wedding photos, displayed on the mantelpiece, searching the smiling faces for clues, for some sign of the fault lines that had been hidden beneath the surface. The David in those pictures, so full of love and promise, felt like a different person from the broken man who now shared her address, but not her life. She continued her calls with Chloe, dissecting every therapy session, every nuance of David's words. "He says he was lonely," Ellie reported one night, pacing the guest room. "Can you believe that? After everything I did, everything I tried to be." "Maybe he was, Elle," Chloe said thoughtfully. "People can be lonely in a crowd, or even in a marriage. It doesn't excuse what he did, not by a million miles. But it might be part of the why. And you wanted to know why, remember?" The Boston winter deepened, mirroring the frost in Ellie's heart. Snow blanketed the city, muffling sounds, creating an illusion of peace that felt profoundly at odds with her inner turmoil. She found herself walking for hours along the frozen esplanade, the wind whipping at her face, the gray Charles River a ribbon of despair. She was lost, adrift in a sea of hurt and confusion. One session, Dr. Hansen asked them each to describe what they thought their marriage was like before the affair. Ellie spoke of stability, partnership, a comfortable routine. "I thought we were happy," she said, her voice small. "Busy, yes. Maybe we didn't talk about deep things as much as we used to. But I thought we were solid." David, when it was his turn, painted a different picture. He spoke of quiet desperation, of feeling like he was on a treadmill, of a growing distance he didn't know how to bridge. "I felt like a component," he said, struggling for words. "A necessary part of the machine, but not seen. Not really seen for who I was or what I was going through." He looked at Ellie, his eyes pleading for understanding. "I never knew how to say it. I thought it would sound like I was blaming you." Ellie felt a flicker of something other than anger, a faint, uncomfortable stirring of recognition. Had she been too focused on her own career, on maintaining the perfect facade of their life? Had she mistaken routine for contentment, silence for peace? The questions were unwelcome, unsettling. It was easier to stay angry. But Dr. Hansen gently persisted, guiding them through exercises designed to improve communication, to help them identify and articulate their emotions and needs. Skills that, Ellie was beginning to realize, had been sorely lacking in their marriage. They learned about I statements, about active listening, about validating each other's feelings even when they didn't agree. It felt clinical, artificial at first, like learning a foreign language. "I feel hurt when you say you were lonely because it makes me feel like I failed you," Ellie managed to say one session, the words tasting foreign and vulnerable on her tongue. Instead of his usual defensiveness, David looked at her, his expression softening. "I hear that, Ellie. I understand why you feel that way. It wasn't about you failing. It was about me, not knowing how to reach out." It was a tiny crack of light in the overwhelming darkness. Not forgiveness, not by a long shot, but it was something. A shift in the tectonic plates of their shattered relationship. The work was grueling, emotionally draining. Often, Ellie would leave Dr. Hansen's office feeling raw and exhausted, retreating to the guest room to weep or stare blankly out the window. But she kept going back. David kept going back. Something compelled them, a grim determination to see this through, whatever the outcome. The sessions with Dr. Hansen became a strange, sacred space. Outside, their lives were still fractured, the brownstones still echoing with unspoken resentments and the ghost of betrayal. But within the calm confines of that Back Bay office, a different kind of dynamic was slowly, painstakingly emerging. Dr. Hansen encouraged them to write letters to each other, unsent letters at first, articulating the things they found too difficult to say face to face. Ellie poured her rage, her grief, her bewilderment onto the page. She wrote about the sapphire dress, now a symbol of everything stolen. She wrote about the scent of Amanda's perfume, a smell she thought would haunt her forever. She wrote about the future she had envisioned, now a smudged, uncertain landscape. David, in his letters, wrote of his profound shame, his self-loathing. He wrote about the moment of panicked clarity after the act, the sudden, sickening realization of what he had done, what he had risked, what he had lost. He didn't make excuses, but he tried to explain the emptiness that had made him susceptible to such a catastrophic lapse in judgment. He wrote about his fear of losing Ellie, a fear that was now a constant, visceral ache. Dr. Hansen then had them read parts of these letters aloud to each other in session. It was excruciating. Ellie's voice trembled as she read her words of pain, but for the first time, she saw something other than just guilt in David's eyes. She saw a reflection of her own suffering. When David read his voice often cracked, and Ellie, despite herself, felt a reluctant pang of, not sympathy perhaps, but a recognition of his brokenness. He wasn't just a monster, a betrayer. He was a flawed, deeply unhappy man who had made a terrible, life-altering mistake. This didn't lessen the severity of his actions. The betrayal was still a raw, gaping wound. But the layers of pure, unadulterated rage began to subtly peel back, revealing a more complex tapestry of emotions underneath. Grief, disappointment, and a bewildering sense of loss for the man she thought she knew, and the marriage she thought she had. One particularly difficult session focused on the concept of forgiveness. "I can't," Ellie stated flatly. "I don't think I can ever forgive him." "How do you forgive something like this?" Dr. Hansen nodded. "Forgiveness isn't for him, Ellie. Not necessarily. It's for you. It's about letting go of the poison that his actions have injected into your system. It doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean condoning. It means choosing to release the hold that this pain has on you." Ellie was silent, turning the words over in her mind. Release the hold? It felt like the pain was all she had left, the only thing that felt real and true in the wreckage. Slowly, tentatively, they began to talk about their lives before the affair. Not just the surface-level routines, but the undercurrents. Ellie admitted her own tendencies to bury her emotional needs, to prioritize work and practicalities over connection. I guess I thought if everything looked perfect on the outside, it would be perfect on the inside too, she confessed, a tear tracing a path down her cheek. I was so focused on achieving, on building, I didn't see we were eroding. David spoke of his fear of vulnerability, a product of his upbringing where emotions were rarely discussed. I didn't know how to tell you I was struggling, he said. I felt like I had to be the strong one, the provider. Admitting I was unhappy felt like failure, like I was letting you down. These revelations weren't excuses for the infidelity. Dr. Hansen was always careful to emphasize that. But they were context. They were the dry tinder that David's reckless act had set ablaze. The atmosphere in the brownstone began to shift, almost imperceptibly at first. The silences were still there, but they were less icy, more contemplative. One evening, Ellie found David in the kitchen, attempting to make her favorite risotto. It was slightly burnt, but he looked up at her with such tentative hope that she found herself saying, "It smells almost good." He smiled, a small, hesitant expression she hadn't seen in months. Almost is progress, right? They ate in silence, but it was a different kind of silence. Later that week, she found a single, perfect gardenia, her favorite flower, on her pillow in the guest room. No note, just the flower. Physical intimacy was still off the table, a landscape too fraught with pain and distrust. But other forms of connection began to tentatively re-emerge. They started taking short walks together in the evenings, bundled against the lingering Boston chill. They didn't talk much, but the shared rhythm of their steps, the quiet companionship, felt like a fragile bridge being built across a vast divide. The issue of Amanda Stevens had to be confronted. In one session, Ellie, her voice steady but firm, laid out her non-negotiables. I need to know you will never have contact with her again. Ever. And frankly, David, I don't see how you can continue to work at the same firm. David didn't hesitate. I've already been looking, he said. My resume is out. I've spoken to HR about a transfer to a different department in the interim, one with no overlap. If that doesn't happen quickly, I'll resign. There is no version of our future, if we have one, where she is any part of my life, even professionally. His decisiveness surprised Ellie. It was the first concrete action that signaled a genuine commitment to change beyond words and apologies. Chloe remained her steadfast confidant. It's strange, Chloe, Ellie said one evening. I still feel so much anger sometimes, so much hurt. But there are moments when I see him, really see him, and he's not the villain I painted him to be. He's just human and broken. And I'm starting to see my own broken pieces too. That's huge, Ellie, Chloe said. That's the work. It doesn't mean you have to stay. It just means you're seeing the whole picture. Spring arrived in Boston with a hesitant burst of pale green and watery sunshine. The snow melted, revealing the damp earth beneath. It felt symbolic. The frozen landscape of their marriage was beginning to thaw, though what would grow in its place remained uncertain. One Saturday, David suggested they drive out to Walden Pond. They had gone there often in their early years, drawn by its history and its tranquil beauty. Ellie hesitated, the place laden with memories of a happier, more innocent time. But she agreed. They walked the familiar trails, the scent of pine and damp earth filling the air. They didn't talk about the incident as they had come to call it. Instead, they talked about the trees, the light on the water, the book Ellie was reading. It was normal, almost. As they stood by the water's edge, David reached out tentatively and took her hand. Ellie's first instinct was to pull away, but she didn't. His hand was warm, familiar. She didn't squeeze back, not yet, but she let him hold it. It was a small gesture, but it felt monumental, a silent acknowledgement of a possibility, however fragile. The turning point wasn't a dramatic revelation or a tearful, movie-style reconciliation. It was quieter, deeper, a seismic shift that occurred in the subtle, subterranean landscape of Ellie's heart. It happened during a therapy session in late April, the city outside finally surrendering to the insistent bloom of spring. Dr. Hansen had been guiding them through an exercise on empathy, asking them to try and articulate what they imagined the other was truly feeling. Not just about the affair, but about their lives, their fears, their unspoken dreams. David went first. He spoke of Ellie's strength, her resilience, but also of the deep well of pain he knew he had caused. I see how much I hurt you, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Not just your pride or your trust in me, but your trust in the world, in yourself. I see the way you look at me sometimes, like I'm a stranger, and it kills me. I imagine you're terrified of being hurt again, terrified of making the wrong decision, terrified that nothing will ever be right again. He paused, looking directly at her. And I know you grieve, Ellie. You grieve for the life we had, or the life you thought we had. And I am so sorry that I am the cause of that grief. Ellie listened, her defenses, for once, lowered. His words weren't just apologies. They were an acknowledgement, a validation of the depth and breadth of her suffering. He saw it. He finally, truly saw it. When it was her turn, she struggled. It was still so hard to look past her own pain, to extend that same empathy to the man who had caused it. But Dr. Hansen waited patiently. Slowly, Ellie began to speak. Not about David's actions, but about the man she thought he was, the man she was now trying to understand. I think you were lost, she said, her voice barely a whisper. I think you felt invisible. Not just to me, but maybe to yourself. I think you were scared. Scared of not being successful enough, not being good enough, scared of getting older, of life becoming just this. She gestured vaguely. And I think, in that moment, you just wanted to feel something. Anything. To feel seen, even if it was by the wrong person, in the wrong way. As she spoke, she looked at David. He was crying. Not theatrically, but silent tears tracing paths down his face. He wasn't trying to hide them. He just sat there, exposed, vulnerable. And in that moment, something shifted within Ellie. The anger, which had been a burning inferno for so long, didn't disappear, but it receded, like a wave drawing back from the shore, revealing something else beneath. A profound, aching sadness. Sadness for him, for his loneliness, for the choices he had made out of that desolation. Sadness for herself, for the innocence lost. Sadness for the us that had been so carelessly shattered. And what I feel now, Ellie continued, her own eyes welling up, is I'm tired of being angry. It's exhausting. And I'm scared. I'm scared that even if we try, this wound will always be there. That I'll never really trust you again. That I'll always be waiting for the other shoe to drop. She took a shaky breath. But there's another part of me, a very small part, that wonders if we've come this far, through all this ugliness, is there a chance to build something different? Something realer? The question hung in the air. It wasn't a commitment. It wasn't forgiveness. It was a sliver of possibility, voiced aloud for the first time. David looked at her, his expression a mixture of disbelief and a fragile, burgeoning hope. Ellie, he choked out, I would do anything to try and build that with you, if you're willing to even consider it. Dr. Hansen watched them, her expression unrateable but gentle. This is a significant moment, she said softly. It's a choice point, not a final decision, but a willingness to explore a different path forward, together. Leaving the session that day, Ellie felt lighter, not happy, not healed, but as if an immense weight she hadn't fully realized she was carrying had been partially lifted. The anger had been a heavy burden, its sharp edges constantly cutting into her. Letting go of some of it didn't mean condoning David's actions. It meant reclaiming a part of herself that had been consumed by the fire. That evening, back in the brownstone, an unspoken truce seemed to settle. David made dinner. A simple pasta, not burnt this time. They ate at the kitchen island, not in the formal dining room that felt too laden with ghosts. They talked, not about the affair, but about their day, about an article Ellie had read, a project David was tentatively excited about at the prospect of a new job he was interviewing for. Later, as she was heading to the guest room, David stopped her. Ellie? She turned. Thank you, he said, his voice quiet. For considering. She nodded, a small, almost imperceptible movement. Good night, David. That night, for the first time in months, Ellie didn't bolt the guest room door. She didn't move back into the master bedroom, not yet. That was a step too far, a landscape still too treacherous. But the unbolted door felt like a symbol, a tiny opening, a possibility. The path ahead was still shrouded in mist, uncertain and daunting. But for the first time, it didn't feel entirely like a dead end. The months that followed the turning point were a testament to the adage that healing is not linear. There were days when Ellie felt a cautious optimism, a sense of tentative progress. They continued their therapy sessions with Dr. Hansen, delving deeper into their individual histories, their attachment styles, the ingrained patterns of communication, or lack thereof, that had contributed to the silent erosion of their marriage long before Amanda Stevens became a name. Ellie would forever associate with pain. They learned to fight differently. Disagreements still arose about small domestic issues, about interpretations of past events. But instead of escalating into icy withdrawals or explosive anger, they tried, haltingly, to use the tools Dr. Hansen had given them. When you say that, I feel dismissed, Ellie might say, her voice tight but controlled, instead of resorting to sarcasm. And David, instead of becoming defensive, would practice active listening. "So what I hear you saying is that my comment made you feel like your opinion doesn't matter. Is that right?" It felt clumsy, almost robotic at times, but it was a world away from their previous destructive cycles. David secured a new job at a smaller investment firm across town. The relief Ellie felt when he handed in his resignation at his old company was palpable. It was a concrete step, a severing of a tie to the source of the betrayal. Amanda Stevens became a ghost, no longer a present threat, though her shadow lingered. There were also bad days, days when the wound felt as raw as it had in the beginning. A stray memory, a particular song on the radio, even a certain angle of light in their brownstone could trigger a wave of grief and anger. On those days, Ellie would retreat, the guest room once again her sanctuary. David learned slowly not to push her, but to give her space, to offer quiet support, a cup of tea left outside her door, a simple, "I'm here if you need me." Trust was the hardest mountain to climb. Ellie found herself scrutinizing David's behavior, questioning his motives, dissecting his words for hidden meanings. If he was late from work, a familiar cold dread would grip her, even though he now called or texted meticulously. "It's like I'm living with a permanent alarm system inside me," she confessed to Chloe. "And I hate it. I hate this suspicious, cynical person I've become." "That's the trauma, Elle," Chloe said gently. "It rewires you. It'll take time. Be patient with yourself." Dr. Hansen helped them understand that rebuilding trust wasn't about David proving himself trustworthy through grand gestures, but through consistent, reliable, transparent behavior over time. It was about him showing up, emotionally and physically, day after day. It was about him being willing to answer the same painful questions again and again, without defensiveness, until Ellie felt heard. Slowly, painstakingly, Ellie began to lower her guard, brick by brick. She started joining David for dinner in the dining room again. They took weekend trips, exploring small towns in New England, consciously creating new memories to overlay the old, tainted ones. They rediscovered shared interests they'd let slide: hiking, visiting art galleries, trying new restaurants. One cool summer evening, months after the turning point, they were sitting on a bench in the public garden, watching the swan boats glide across the lagoon. The air was soft, fragrant with the scent of blooming roses. "Do you remember," David said quietly, "that awful fight we had years ago about the color to paint the kitchen? Before the renovation?" Ellie smiled faintly. "Vividly. I wanted that pale yellow. You were insisting on some hideous shade of green." "Avocado," he corrected, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. "It was avocado, and I thought it was very sophisticated." They both chuckled. It was a simple, shared memory, untainted by the darkness that had come later. A small piece of their old us that felt safe to revisit. "We compromised on cream eventually," Ellie recalled. "Boring, but peaceful." "Maybe boring isn't so bad," David said, his gaze meeting hers. There was a depth in his eyes she hadn't seen before the affair, a quiet understanding born of shared suffering and hard-won insights. The question of physical intimacy loomed large. For a long time, Ellie couldn't bear the thought of it. The betrayal had made her body feel like a site of trauma. But as emotional closeness tentatively grew, so did a different kind of awareness. She started to notice David in small ways again, the way his eyes crinkled when he genuinely smiled, the familiar scent of his skin, unmarred by alien perfume, the comforting weight of his presence beside her on the sofa as they watched a movie. One night, after a particularly open and vulnerable conversation, as she was about to head to the guest room, David reached for her hand. "Ellie," he said, his voice gentle, Can I just hold you? Not for anything more, just hold you." She hesitated. Her mind warred, the fear, the memory of pain against a nascent longing for comfort, for simple human touch. She looked into his eyes, saw the raw vulnerability there, the absence of demand, only a quiet plea. Slowly, she nodded. He led her to their master bedroom, a room she hadn't slept in for nearly a year. It felt strange, almost foreign. He didn't try to kiss her, didn't make any move that felt like pressure. He simply lay down beside her on top of the covers and gathered her into his arms. Ellie remained stiff at first, her body braced for... she didn't know what. But his embrace was gentle, undemanding. He just held her, his chin resting on the top of her head, his breathing steady. And slowly, ever so slowly, some of the tension began to seep out of her. She felt the warmth of his body, the steady beat of his heart against her back. It was comforting, in a way she hadn't realized how much she'd missed. She didn't sleep much that night, but she lay there, held, and for the first time, the master bedroom didn't feel like a haunted space. It felt like a possibility. Their journey wasn't about returning to what they had been. That marriage, Ellie realized, was gone forever, shattered by the betrayal. What they were building now, if they were to succeed, had to be something new, forged in the fires of their crisis, built on a foundation of brutal honesty and a shared understanding of their individual and collective frailties. Ellie found herself changing in ways she hadn't anticipated. The crisis had stripped away her carefully constructed facade, forcing her to confront her own vulnerabilities, her own needs, her own capacity for resilience. She was less concerned with the appearance of perfection, more attuned to the nuances of authentic connection. She rediscovered parts of herself she had neglected, her love for painting, her need for quiet introspection. She was, in many ways, stronger than she had ever been, but it was a quieter, more knowing strength. David, too, was different. The experience had humbled him, stripped him of his complacency. He was more present, more emotionally available than he had ever been. He learned to articulate his feelings, his fears, his needs, rather than letting them fester in silence. He worked hard, not just at his new job, but at being a partner, truly a partner, in a way he hadn't understood before. They grew closer, not in a romantic fairy tale sense, but in a way that felt grittier, more profound. Their bond was tempered by the knowledge of what they had survived, the shared scars a testament to their ordeal and their efforts. It was a closeness born of seeing each other at their absolute worst, and somehow choosing to find a path back to and with each other. A year and a half after the night David came home smelling of another woman's perfume, Ellie stood by the window of their living room, looking out at the familiar Boston streetscape. It was early autumn, the air crisp, the leaves just beginning to turn those familiar shades of amber and rust. But this year, the colors didn't feel melancholic. They felt like a promise of renewal, of the cyclical nature of life, of beauty emerging even after a harsh season. The brownstone felt like home again. Not the same home it had been before. That home was part of a past that was irrevocably altered. This was a new home, one where the windows felt wider, letting in more light, and the silences were comfortable, filled with unspoken understanding rather than unspoken resentments. She heard David come up behind her, felt his arms slide gently around her waist. He rested his chin on her shoulder, his familiar warmth a comforting presence. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. Ellie leaned back against him. "Just how different things are." "Better different, I hope," he murmured into her hair. "Yes," she said, a genuine smile touching her lips. Better different. Their journey had been an odyssey through the darkest landscapes of their marriage and their own souls. There were still moments, of course, when a shadow of the past would fall, a fleeting insecurity for Ellie, a pang of remorse for David. The scar of the betrayal would always be there, a reminder of the fragility of trust and the devastation of broken vows. But it no longer defined them. It had become part of their story. A painful chapter that had, against all odds, led to a deeper, more authentic narrative. They still saw Dr. Hansen, though less frequently now, for what she called maintenance and continued growth. They had learned that a relationship wasn't a destination to be reached, but a journey to be continually navigated, requiring ongoing effort, communication, and a willingness to be vulnerable. The closer they had become was not the breathless, naive closeness of their early years. It was a mature intimacy, forged in fire, built on a foundation of hard truths and shared vulnerability. They knew each other's flaws, weaknesses, and fears in a way they never had before. And they had chosen to love each other, not in spite of them, but perhaps in some ways because of them. Because those very frailties made them human, made their efforts to connect all the more meaningful. Ellie had found a strength in herself she hadn't known she possessed. She had walked through the inferno of betrayal and emerged, not unscathed, but whole. She was more self-aware, more attuned to her own needs, and less willing to settle for a life that was merely picture-perfect on the surface. Her dreams were different now, less about external achievements and more about internal peace and authentic connection. David had confronted his demons, and in doing so had become a better man, more empathetic, more present, more honest. He had learned the devastating consequences of his actions, but also the redemptive power of true remorse and sustained effort. Their future wasn't a guaranteed happily ever after. They knew that. Life was too unpredictable for such certainties. But they faced it together, with open eyes and a shared commitment to the imperfect, challenging, but ultimately rewarding work of building a life rooted in honesty and mutual respect. That evening, they hosted a small dinner party for a few close friends, including Chloe, who had driven up from New York. The laughter and conversation flowed easily, filling the brownstone with a warmth that felt genuine and unforced. As Ellie watched David across the table, sharing a story, his eyes meeting hers with a look of quiet affection and understanding, she felt a sense of peace settle over her. It wasn't the life she had envisioned all those years ago. It was something different, something harder won, something perhaps even more precious. The lessons had been brutal, the cost immeasurable. But in the crucible of crisis, they had found an unexpected path, not just to survival, but to a new kind of thriving. The core message, Ellie often thought, wasn't about infidelity itself, but about what comes after the shattering. It was about the resilience of the human heart, the transformative power of truly seeing and being seen, and the profound, often painful journey of learning to rebuild, to forgive, not just the other, but oneself, and to find a different, more authentic way to love. The chill of that long-ago November night had finally truly receded, replaced by the steady warmth of a hard-earned, imperfect, but deeply real connection. And as the Boston evening deepened around them, Ellie Vance knew, with a quiet certainty that resonated deep in her soul, that this new dawn, however unexpected, was her own.